Start. Let us start. Typical, let us start.
Okay, hello learners. So in this session we are going to discuss about the conservation of biodiversity. We have already discussed what are the reasons which are causing the loss of biodiversity, and you already know the importance of the biodiversity. So let us start with this. The conservation of diversity is actually the preservation of the delicate balance of the environment, of the ecological balance, the genetic diversity, the sustainable utilization of life support system, and also there is a vast knowledge of potential use of biodiversity. So this reservoir of in which is present in the wild variety of animals and plants, they are need to be reintroduced, and also it it shows the sustainable utilization of potential resources. But this conservation techniques we will see, uh, they vary because we use different products from the biodiversity. We require a constant supply of certain products, so we need to manage them. We need to adopt a mechanism as per their use, as per their place in our society. There are several strategies, and accordingly, there are several time frames, and for the same goal of conserving the biodiversity. It started in 1972 when the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, UNCHE, which was held in Stockholm, where this conservation was felt necessary to conserve the biodiversity and also the concept of sustainable use, because we know that this is the overexploitation of the resources which has caused the which is a serious threat for biodiversity. So although we will always need the products, but we have to follow a certain method where they can be ensured for a next generation and next generation. That is the sustainable use. In 73, UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, identified the conservation, and then in Convention on Biological Diversity was found in 1992 when the Earth Summit was held in Rio de Janeiro. This convention has these objectives. First of all, conservation of the biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, the diverse components, plants and animals and microbes, and fair and equitable sharing of its benefits. This concept of sustainability here, equity here. A lot of countries of the world are the biodiversity is not equally distributed. Some of the countries are quite rich in biodiversity, and some of them do not have that resource. So some areas of biodiversity has been identified as hotspots, which exhibit a very high variety, or you can call as species richness. There's another term you see here is the species endemism. In these areas, the species have evolved. They are found particularly in a certain area and not anywhere else in the world. This is known as endemism. When the species are found in a particular geographical area, they are endemic to that region. So many regions, many pockets all around the world have been identified which are very high in biodiversity, rich in biodiversity, and as well as a lot of endemic species are present. In India also, we have certain regions and they are identified as hotspots. You can see here that this term was given by Norman Myers. He was a British ecologist, and he started this concept because we especially need to conserve certain regions which are hotspots of biodiversity. If they are disturbed, we are going to lose a huge resource, wild, wild variety which may not be found anywhere else. So this is a list which is showing the 25 biodiversity hotspots all around the world. They are listed here. I'll also show you the map where they're located, and some of the tropical wilderness areas are also identified. Here, see, this is the population density, the brown color. The biodiversity hotspots are marked as red outline. So you can see every region has its own significance, has its own set of plants and animals, flora and fauna developing in that particular region, adapted to that particular climate, and rich in diversity. Wilderness areas are also present. This A and D you can see, which is written over here. So you can see in India also we have two regions mainly, the Western Ghats and the Northeastern Himalayas, where the biodiversity is very high. And also these regions are under the threat because slight changes in the climate or any activities which causes the destruction of the habitat is going to be very bad for biodiversity, especially in the hotspots. So to conserve biodiversity, there are basically two mechanisms under which we will see what are the different ways of conservation. So broadly, we call these as in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. This particular flow chart is showing the division. We will discuss each of them separately. You can see that the protected areas come under in situ conservation, where it means the species are conserved in their natural habitat, in their own habitat. The region where they are found itself is conserved or protected. There are certain categories under this, and they can be terrestrial as well as marine, because a lot of marine landscapes, marine ecosystems are also being disturbed, destroyed. Coral reefs are getting depleted, which are highly, hotspots, which are rich in biodiversity, which support other species also. So such regions have to be identified and protected by stopping all the destructive activities in this region, or whatever required, whatever steps required. Ex situ basically is where we preserve in some form, we preserve these plants or animals outside their natural habitat in some forms like seed bank, or preserving their cytoplasm, their cells. We will see what in details. So this is the comparison of these two types of conservation strategies. The conservation of ecosystem and natural habitats, including maintenance and recovery of viable populations of species in their natural habitat. So eventually you will also see that some of the methods adopted under in situ conservation are also improving the level of the areas which are exposed to degradation or which have got degraded over the period of time. They are converted into a protected area. Then steps are taken so that they can recover and they can be develop a full-fledged ecosystem, which has been lost due to some of the human activities or some practices. It occurs in nature, like in a protected area, in a traditional farm, nature reserve, or a national park. So in situ conservation helps to guarantee the survival of a species in its natural habitat. This is the significance of this conservation. However, sometimes it is not possible to preserve or to maintain species in their natural habitat because of some prevailing destructive activities, or because of some permanently changed situations or change in the climate. So in these cases, we have to prepare artificially mm, the places, or we have to adopt certain methods outside their natural habitat to conserve them, like conservation of components of biodiversity outside their natural habitats. Example, in zoo, botanical gardens, gene banks, museums. So they are the places from where they can be propagated again. So ex situ conservation is used for threatened and endangered species. The species which are on the verge of extinction, which will be lost from the environment if you don't take serious steps. So these are the extreme steps to conserve, especially the threatened and endangered species. Sometimes it is also known as captive conservation because you will see these zoological gardens. They are not there only for the display of the animals from different parts of the world. They are actually protecting them, helping them in captive breeding. Sometimes some animals are not uh, breeding; they are facing some problems in the wild, or their young ones die, they don't get proper food, proper care. So in zoo, they provide those care so that they can propagate. And many times they are again reintroduced into the wild. So this is also equally important. So this is again same thing where you will see what are these things. In protected areas in situ, you will find national parks, sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and sacred forests and lakes. Some areas in India, there are several regions where the tribals, they live in the forest, they protect that patch of the forest as their deity, they worship them. They get all their requirements from the forest, but they don't destroy the forest, they protect it. So such sacred groves, sacred forests or lakes are also very helpful in conservation of biodiversity. Ex situ conservation will be like seed banks, gene banks, captive breeding, animal translocations, tissue culture banks, especially the plants. The plants can be propagated from a single cell, from a tissue. This is developed in laboratory, and the whole plant can be grown out of it and can be planted. So cryopreservation, botanical gardens, zoological gardens, we will see everything in details. Now, this is the definition given by CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. The in situ conservation is defined as the conservation of ecosystems and natural habitat and the maintenance and recovery of viable populations of species in their natural surroundings. And in the case of domesticated or cultivated species, in the surroundings where they have developed their distinctive properties. So it also includes the farmlands where the domesticated breeds are conserved. So in situ management approaches can either be targeted at populations of selected species. So some of the programs are species-centered programs. Especially you have heard about the Project Tiger or any from the program run for rhinoceros and crocodiles. So species-centered approaches are followed when that species is particularly under threat and their number are decreasing rapidly. Or sometimes the whole ecosystem is preserved. So you will see that the biosphere reserves, which is a large-scale protected area, is based on ecosystem-based approach. Okay, we will start with the national park here. I'm sure you must have heard about national parks. There are several national parks in our country, and you must have visited also, or you must plan to visit one in future. Here, the animals live freely. It's a boundary where demarcated by law. It cannot be. No activity is allowed inside this boundary, only except for some visitor or recreational purposes. So the animals in that area are living free in that area. And if you have visited, you know that if you want to go and see them, you have to be in a cage, like you have to be in a closed vehicle or something to go and look at them. And the property inside the boundary of the national park is restricted property. Not even a single twig can be taken out from a national park. It belongs to that park. So that region, that protected area is actually completely uh, completely preserved, and animals are allowed to live in that area. So such areas where the species, some species are threatened because of poaching, killing, or any other activity, any exploitation. They are marked as a protected area, and then national parks, and then they can be protected. So in India now, more than 100 national parks are already present, are close to 104, I guess, presently. And this is the map which is showing national parks all around the country. You can see northeastern region have their own ecosystem, have their own species which need to be protected. Then in Himalayan regions, in the central India, western India, southern India, everywhere a lot of national parks, and there are several national parks still coming up. So whenever the requirement is felt that a certain region is getting degraded, and the species which are particularly found in that region are under threat, that can be demarcated as a protected area. Now the second level is wildlife sanctuaries, the second type of in situ conservation. As you can see, it is a wildlife sanctuary. So here they are generally selected for a special wildlife. They are based on a particular wildlife of that region, especially if that animal is in the danger of extinction or they are already less in number. So the area is demarcated. The boundaries of wildlife sanctuaries are not as strict as the boundaries of national parks, but still the other anthropogenic activities are not allowed inside this, and slowly the habitat restores itself. It becomes more healthy, and it supports that particular species which is living in that region. We can see that these wildlife sanctuaries are the most prevalent protected areas all around the country. You can see so many everywhere. It's more than five. It's, I think, more than 560 now, and still adding. So, and each name where you see, you will find that a particular species is kept under mind, whether plant species or an animal species, which is focused to be conserved in that area. Not one species, like 4 5 species of a particular, like in a Himalayan region, the rhododendron, it needs to be protected. That is a plant, that is a flower, which is found only in the higher altitudes. And some, a Himalayan bear, and some so great Himalayan national park is there, and a wildlife sanctuary. Wildlife sanctuary is generally bigger than a national park, so it will have broader boundaries, which protects the whole habitat of that particular wildlife. This is the third type of in situ conservation, the biosphere reserves, and this is the biggest one. Area wise, they are so big that they can even incorporate a national park inside them. So there is a difference. The biosphere reserve boundaries are not as strict as wildlife sanctuaries or national parks. They have certain regions divided for certain purposes. So the main purpose of biosphere reserve is to protect the whole ecosystem. It may include a water body, a forest, or a grassland, and the species living there. So it helps in restoration of the ecosystem itself. And it also incorporates the tribal life. You can see that it protects and preserves the traditional life tribal people live around the reserve. The different zones are divided. So here you can see that this is the broader outer boundary of a biosphere reserve. There are 3 zones basically. In the center zone is known as the core zone. This is the region where no activity is allowed. So generally, this is a degraded region which is demarcated by a boundary, and all the animals and plants, or maybe the ecosystem, needs to be restored in that region. So no activity is allowed, not even tourism. It can be only monitored, not even a research activity is allowed. Around that will be a buffer zone. Here, some activities like research activities, tourism, grazing of animals may be allowed. But at the same time, it is protected. It is not exploited. Only the activities are allowed in a sustainable manner. Then you will see a transition zone, and you can also see the human settlements in this area. The human settlements may also overlap in this buffer zone. Okay, so you will find a certain variation when you will study. So uh, this settlement is not a urban settlement like that, like we have in cities, but these are very eco-friendly settlement, the tribal settlement, which live inside the forest and use the forest produce, but they do not disturb, they do not destroy it. So some of the agricultural activities, some crop cultivation can be allowed, some tree cutting is allowed along with the plantation. It should be balanced. So these regions are open regions. This is the boundary is not very strict, and they can also help in developing a sustainable way of protection, where the use as well as protection go hand in hand. Biosphere reserve also, we have 18 biosphere reserves till now. These are very big areas, and you can see these bigger areas. You can see this flag marked wherever the biosphere reserves are there, and the names are written here. So we have here in Nicobar, Andaman and Nicobar, we have in Himalayan regions, we have northeastern regions. All these big ecosystem protection is being done by making them a biosphere reserve. Now come to sacred groves, which I was talking about. Tribal people which live, and as well as they worship. They worship trees. Generally, their deities are in the form of a group of trees, or a tree, a very big tree, old tree, and they do not cut. They do not allow anybody to cut, and they protect it. They use the products. They use, but they do not destroy anything. So such sacred groves are a great place of conservation. In Chhattisgarh, there is a tribal university which is actually working on a lot of sacred groves like this, and 14,000 have been reported, see, all over the country. It is more than this, however, we have reported only, we have found this much which have been recorded. So you can see some pictures of sacred groves where they are present in a very serene environment. And because of their beliefs, they do not allow anybody to enter it, so they are not destroyed. So such places are a great place of in situ conservation of the plant species and the animal species living in that area. So we need to conserve that in a way. What are the advantages? First of all, the flora and fauna live in a natural habitat without human interference. So they are developing the wilderness. The term wilderness itself explains that the natural evolving of the different plants and animal species. And you know how important it is for us, because we'll get the solution of most of our problems in those wilderness if they are protected. The life cycle of organisms and their evolution progresses in a natural way, which is very important. In captivity, it is not possible. We can only preserve them, which we want, which we know that they are. We need them, but we don't know. It may evolve into a very something which is much more useful and much more adapted to the current situation. So evolution has to be go on. Now, this conservation provides required green cover and associated benefit. You know that for balancing the environment, for the cleaning of the air, the water cycle, all these services which the ecosystem provides us, for this, we need to have a proper green cover. And we have calculated that at least 33% of every country should be under green cover, which is not easy to be met because the countries have different climate systems, they have different soil systems, some countries are completely arid. But overall, if we can maintain this much of green cover, then we are going to have a very healthy habitat for human being as well. So it is less expensive way because we only have to protect that area. We don't have to create that area. It is already natural. And the interest of the indigenous people. It is very important to protect the interest. And there are several topics related with that, which I think it won't be easy for me to cover everything in this short period of time. But if you know about the traditional knowledge the indigenous people have, they have very deep knowledge about the medicines which may be very rare and very endemic to that region. And the scientific community is yet to discover a lot of them. So indigenous people, indigenous knowledge can be preserved in this way only if we allow this kind of in situ conservation. So now we are moving on to ex situ conservation. When we need to preserve them, the biodiversity outside its natural habitat. There are several reasons for that. Then ex situ conservation techniques are used. It is a chief mode for preservation of genetic resources, which may include both cultivated and wild material. So the seeds or in vitro plant cells, tissues, in vitro means in a test tube, in a glass tube. So there are several ways. They can be preserved under a very low temperature to suspend their activities, and then they can be brought to life when they are taken out. So many tissues, many, especially the seeds, the germ plasm of plants and animals, the semen of animals, they can be preserved in this manner. Collection of these living organisms, living collections, seed banks, pollen, vegetative propagules, tissues, or cell cultures. It is uh, it is a very scientific method where what need to be collected and how it need to be preserved, that can be done. So let us see in details how different methods of ex situ conservation work. This is a very important that integrated conservation management can ensure that ex situ collections can support in situ conservations, because if any species is threatened, we manage to revive them, increase their number by ex situ collections, ex situ conservation, and reintroduce them into the wild. So, in situ conservation can be supported in this way through habitat restoration and species recovery. So, basically, two ways by which ex situ conservation can be done. Conventional method is just preserving the genes, preserving the seeds, having botanical gardens, having zoological gardens, where we keep the germ plasm, we keep the seeds, we keep the pollens, we keep the semens, or we allow them to grow in a botanical garden, or we propagate them in a zoological garden. These are the conventional methods, but there are several biotechnological aspects where which comes in vitro conservation. That is propagating them through one cell or one tissue. So this, I hope this you must have seen how in Jurassic Park movie, the first one, they have propagated the dinosaur, which have become extinct now. So how it was possible? If you remember, the germplasm was preserved inside a resin, inside the blood of I think a mosquito or something, where they could take it out, they could revive it because it was preserved. It was not destroyed. So they could. It was just it's a hypothetical thing, but in case of plants, under cryopreservation, it is possible. it is possible. Although for dinosaurs it is hypothetical, but for other many varieties it is possible. So large number of threatened, rare, endangered plant species can be propagated in vitro by clonal propagation, means taking the tissue and making their clones. Even if a
Hello? Okay. Must be from her. Yeah, network connection must be over there. Network issue.
Okay,
I'm
sir. Okay,
contacting.
sir.
Okay. I'm contacting her.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
oh, sorry, I did not
Yeah,
realize
yeah.
it
I
was
was trying to call you. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I did not realize I was disconnected.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I know. That's why I call you because this is the, I mean, disadvantage of this Google.
yes, we can't see whether we are.
In Zoom, we are able to understand, but here in this Google,
Okay, okay,
okay,
I'll go back few slides to continue.
uh, sharing karo sharing.
I don't know whether I started with XC2.
You just started actually too.
Okay, okay, okay. Okay. So here we see that ex-situ conservation methods are for the genetic resources or for the products of the plants or animals which can be conserved outside their natural resources. And they're especially useful for those species which are not present in the wild, which are not able to grow in the wild by their own, and their habitat has been destroyed or lost, and they need support. So many of these endangered, threatened species can be propagated, can be increased in number by following these ex situ conservation methods. So we can see here that they include both cultivated and wild material, because wild material is equally important for us to conserve. Seeds can be preserved very easily, or some of the plant cells, tissues, and organs can also be preserved in vitro, in glass or in test tube, you can say. It requires collection, scientific method of collecting the materials like living seed banks, pollens, vegetative propagals, tissues, or cell cultures, and preserving them. It needs a scientific background, but they can be conventionally preserved also. The important thing here to discuss is integrated conservation management can ensure that ex situ collections can support in situ conservation through habitat restoration and species recovery. So, when ex situ conservation methods propagate the species which are not able to propagate in the wild, they can support in situ conservation by increasing, breeding them, then restoring them. So the species can be recovered in the wild as well. So they are the two main modes of ex situ conservation: conventional methods and biotechnological aspects. Conventionally, we can have gene banks, pollen banks, semen banks, seed banks, botanical gardens or zoological gardens, where the species are kept, grown, or preserved. But a more advanced technology-based method is biotechnological aspect, where in vitro conservation can be done, or cryopreservation, preserving under a very low temperature. So the germplasm, the cells can be cryopreserved and can be used again and again. Now some of the human tissues are also cryopreserved. The stem cells are also cryopreserved because they are required for propagation for the cure of many diseases. Similarly, the threatened species can be preserved in this way. And if you have seen Jurassic Park, you can get this idea. They have used this idea where the germplasm was preserved in a resin, in a mosquito or something, where they took out and they propagated and they developed an egg and then the dinosaur, which is hypothetical in that situation, but this is the true mechanism. So by this method, especially the in vitro conservation can be done by clonal propagation, making the clone. Even if a single species, a single individual is alive in plants, the clones can be made by taking a small tissue out of it. Somatic embryogenesis, making the whole plant out of a small somatic cell. Organogenesis, organs can be developed. Callus differentiation. So this is possible because of the totipotency of the plant cells. Whole tissue culture can be very helpful in propagating a lot of endangered, threatened species of plants in laboratory. Some of the institutes are which are working. I have not listed all, but you must be familiar with these names, so that's why I'm listed here. Indian Botanical Garden, Calcutta is one of the largest and the oldest one, and it has the oldest banyan tree also. So you can see the variety of the plants. There are several botanical gardens all over the country, which are having unique varieties. Many of them are not found in wild now. So that is the significance of a botanical garden. National Botanical Research Institute, Lucknow, is also having its own botanical garden, and it's a whole research institute. Botanical Survey of India, then Agriculture Research Institute, IRI in Delhi, FRI in Dehradun. All these are some of the institutes which are engaged in conservation and protection, and some technologies which help in the ex situ conservation. So we can see overall here, what is the purpose of ex situ conservation? First of all, to rescue threatened germplasm. If it is threatened, it can be preserved in the form of a germplasm. Produce material for conservation biology research. Conserving them, research based on propagating them, protecting them through their germplasm to material, maybe pollen, maybe a cell, maybe a tissue, maybe semen, maybe some other egg cell of animals. So bulk of germplasm for storage, we can store them, and later on we can propagate them into increase their number. Supply material for various purposes to remove or reduce pressure for wild collecting. When we need research in certain areas, we need to collect them from the wild. If we have preserved, propagated, increase in number, we can reduce that pressure. Grow those species with leak acid seeds that cannot be maintained in seed stores. This is the importance of a germplasm preservation. So make available material for conservation education and display, produce material for reintroduction, reinforcement, habitat restoration and management. So ex situ conservation is equally important. Now this is some comparison. In situ conservation occurs in nature and helps to guarantee the survival of a species. And ex situ conservation occurs when a specimen of species set is set in artificial conditions. It is a key element for environment and species education programs because it provides the public with an opportunity to observe rare species. You can go to a lab and you can see them. You can see their seeds, you can see their propagates. So, which is not easily possible if you go and look for them in the wild. But ex situ conservation should be the last resort or as a supplement. We cannot just bring everything into a laboratory and preserve them and clear the land. We know the importance of having the natural habitat. It is in its own way required for a natural balance. Now we'll go on with the body IUCN, where this is International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, which has categorized these different protected areas, and also it has categorized the different levels of the species depending upon what state they are in the environment, whether they are available, whether they are threatened. So we will look that also in further. These are the categories of the protected areas: integral natural reserve, wild nature zone, national park, national monument, managed area for habitat and species, terrestrial and marine landscape, protected area for managed natural resources. So you can see that the three in situ conservation category practices, which we saw: national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves, fall under one or two of these categories. So we have made these laws in our country following the guidelines, following the categories given by IUCN. And we have certain areas which are protected areas for management of natural resources, and some of the integral natural reserve areas like national parks. So you can discuss what are these different national monuments, national heritage areas, or the groves, the sacred groves are also falling under one of these categories. You can discuss, you can see in details. This International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, actually prepares a red data list which categorizes the names of those plants and animals which are becoming less and less in number. They are reducing. We know that a lot of many species, some species which were present in the wild are now not found. They have reduced drastically, and some of them have got completely extinct. So the red data list aware us. What is the use of red data list? Developing awareness about the importance of threatened biodiversity, identification and documentation of endangered species. If we know that these species are under threat, if we know their status in the environment, we can very easily, we will follow the methods, we can be more careful for their preservation. Providing a global index for the decline of biodiversity, how much the biodiversity is declining, what are the important species which are reducing in number, and defining conservation priorities at the local level and guiding conservation action. So this red data list is also very important for the agreements like Convention on Biological Diversity and Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. There are several conventions around the world which are made for the conservation of species. Now, these are the different categories of IUCN. Extinct, you know that they are no longer present in the environment now. These are, for at least the last 50 years, they have not been seen in the environment, in the wild. Then we consider them as extinct. Endangered are the ones which have reduced drastically in their number due to their loss of habitat or some other overexploitation or something like that, and they are very soon going to be extinct. The next level. Then the third level comes the vulnerable species. They are little higher in number than endangered species, but they are also facing the habitat destruction at a very fast rate. So they are also uh, decreasing in size, and slowly they will come in fall in the endangered species level if not controlled. Another category is rare species. Rare are already less in number. Rare means they are geographically found at very special locations and already less in number. So it is very much likely that they will get extinct very soon if their habitat is disturbed or they are exploited. This group is of those species about which we do not know. So we actually have to be very careful about all these species, because if the data is not sufficiently known, we don't know whether they are endangered or they are rare. So we have to be very careful about all kind of species in this category. Now, these are some international conventions and organizations. Some of them, some important of them are listed here, like Ramsar Convention. This is a convention on wetlands, and it is basically for the preservation of the wetlands, which are very important ecosystems, which support not only the local ecology but also the most places the migratory birds, which are threatened if these wetlands are destroyed. Then you have International Union for Conservation of Nature, World Conservation Union, Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species Sites. The endangered list of the endangered species is provided, and trade in any form of their products or themselves, or keeping them as a pet, is also prohibited under this law. So you need to take permission. Now, International Convention for Protection of Birds, especially International Board for Plant Genetic Resources, where genetic resources are preserved. World Resources Institute. It is completely covering all kinds of resources. Worldwide Fund for Nature, this is an international NGO, WWF, which is working in more than 150 countries and having its own agenda and programs of conservation and awareing people about this. Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, because this is generally between two different countries and there should not be any hindrance in migration of these animals. International Convention for Regulation of Whaling. Whales have been killed, and this is a very, a big top carnivore of an ecosystem. So maybe they are less in number, and if they are destroyed, we completely lose them. The UNESCO program on man and biosphere. There are several programs conducted every year, which are based on the conservation, which are making people aware of the conservation practices. Now, in the last, I would like to discuss that the development of the cities. We need development, we are heading towards urbanization, and it is imperative that all the citizens should have proper facilities, which is present in a urban state. So how are we going to balance? How are we going to conserve? So the cities generally are growing in a very destructive manner. We can have a development plan where the policies which can make a more accommodative for the wildlife, for the development of the green spaces, the urban parks, and in large areas, and we can coexist with them. So if the whole region, or you can say a district or a country, is having its policies in a manner to accommodate the cultural development along with the biodiversity conservation, having space for the other species on the earth and conserving them, it will be more beneficial for our own survival. So this was the last point for especially for the city dwellers and for our future plans in this regard. So that is all from my side. Now you can